Now, Washington Mornings on the Mall.
105.9 FM.
At AM 630.
WMAL.
8:37 on WMAL. Brian Neiman and Wilson, joined now by Larry Kudlow, host of the Kudlow Report. You can see him every single night on CNBC, at least Monday through Friday at 7 o'clock. Also, the Larry Kudlow radio show heard here on WMAL Saturdays at 7 p.m. Larry, they had a big election in France and in Greece, and people decided to go left in those countries, it seems, although Greece is kind of all over the place. But the market didn't seem to mind all that much yesterday. What's your overall takeaway from those elections and the impact on the economy and markets?
Well, interesting. Market, you're right, the market didn't do much of anything. I don't know about the French story. I mean, it may be that the worst is yet to come. You know, years ago, over 20 years ago, when France elected a socialist named Francois Mitterrand, he had a lot of crazy ideas about spending and regulating and taxing. And the French markets imploded for quite a while and punished and disciplined him and kind of got him back into the fold. Now, whether that happens with Francois Hollande, I don't know. I think Angela Merkel of Germany runs the European Union. She runs, basically the ECB and all the other things. So I don't think this guy Hollande is going to get far with his high tax and high spend. Sort of sounds familiar, doesn't it? It's like Obama. So we'll have to wait and see on that. He's got to form his government. Greece is a bigger mess. You've got this, the two main parties both lost, and there's some bizarre left-wing party that is trying to form a government. I don't know how that's going to sort out. Most of Greece's paper is held by the ECB and various government bodies. I'm not sure what damage they can do, but they could run out of cash, and they may have to drop out of the euro. I mean, these things are all possible, but at the moment, nobody's really fretting about them.
So what do you read into the unemployment numbers we saw last Friday? I mean, there was sort of a downturn in the market, but not a huge one, and a lot of people
lost 170 points.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen worse.
Yeah, but I think that was a pretty miserable number myself.
So what do you read into that?
Well, what I read into it is that the hopes for stronger growth and employment are being dashed. That's number one. We're in a stall. The whole economy, this whole recovery, is a stall. I mean, you're really looking at a 2.2% GDP in the first quarter, back-to-back lousy jobs numbers. If you put in underemployment and people dropping out of the workforce, the unemployment rate is about 15%. I mean, it's a terrible story. And look, politically, it's a damaging story to Obama. Obviously, it's a helpful story to Romney, who's running pretty much neck and neck in the polls even after a bruising primary season. So I think it's really too bad. I mean, I think that we just can't seem to start the engines of growth. And I still come back to some of the basic building blocks. We've got to have flat tax reform. We've got to have lighter regulations. We've got to have lower spending. We've got to deal with the uncertainties of entitlement reform. We ought to be building Keystone. We ought not to be, EPA crucifying oil and gas companies. Let business take a rip at the ball. Stop punishing rich people. Open the doors to real, steady, strong entrepreneurship. I come back to that. Those are the top-down policies that seem to be inhibiting this economic recovery, and I don't see it changing. If it were going to be stronger, it would be stronger, okay? And it's not. And the numbers in the last couple of months are very disappointing in that regard.
I was watching the show last night, and you said you wanted Mitt Romney to be more specific.
Yeah, I do. We looked at a poll from Investors Business Daily on how investors are going to vote, and that's a huge class. Roughly 60% of those likely to vote own stock. It's a huge class. Now, Romney's ahead. This is registered voters, not likely voters yet. But he was ahead by 3 points in the IBD poll. He should be ahead by 10 or 12 points. And so I think he has to pay more attention now to keep, telling investors specifically, I'm going to keep your capital gains rate down. I'm going to keep your dividend rate down. I'm going to keep your estate and death tax rate down. I think he needs to focus more. And as a general matter, I think he needs to still come up with a clear 3 or 4 point plan to grow the economy. I think he's improved an awful lot, but I think he has more work to do on that. But on investors, George Bush carried them by at least 10 in 2004 and 2000.
Now, as an investor, anybody who has money in the market, like if you have a 401k, is that what you consider an investor?
Either direct or indirect. And I think what the benchmark that Investors Business Daily uses is about $10,000.
Okay.
And as I said, this is a very powerful voting bloc. It's one of the, if not the biggest, it's one of the biggest voting blocs. So, Romney's numbers are okay. They should be much better. And I acknowledge, look, you've had a doubling of stocks since early Obama. I mean, you've had a doubling of stocks. You've had a doubling of profits, which is the mother's milk of stocks. So Obama has, he's got some skin in that game, whether you credit business or whether you credit Obama. He would probably take credit for it. Right. But I think Romney will have the upper hand among investors because of his basic philosophy. He just needs to be more specific with them. I think he needs to be more hands-on.
How much of the sluggishness that you see in this economy is business people sitting on the sidelines waiting to see how this election is going to turn out?
Well, that's an interesting question and impossible to quantify, but I think that it exists. I think particularly on things like taxes and also Obamacare, which is taxes and regulations, right? The cost of hiring is uncertain. And a good amount of that is, in fact, Obamacare, which will reach through the entire business community, both large and small. You might say especially small, but actually large companies, too, are thinking about dumping their employees into the subsidized exchange pool. So I think that's a big issue. I have felt this for quite some time, that ever since Obamacare passed, it was a big deterrent to hiring. And I think the general tax climate and I think the general regulatory climate, none of this is take a rip at the ball. I grew up as a kid working for Reagan, and Reagan's message was take a rip at the ball. Mm-hmm. We're going to make it easier for you. I don't see or hear that from the current administration. Do you?
No, you don't. And let me ask you this other question. If Obamacare is such a factor in many business people's minds, I would imagine that we would see maybe a mini rally if the Supreme Court were to strike that down.
Oh, it could be more than a mini rally. Absolutely. It's a very important point. Very important point.
If you're an investor, you might want to be ready.
You might want to be ready. I'm not a bear right now. I'm sort of a slow bull because I think profits are still going to rise. But I think most of the good news is discounted, and we are coming into this sort of policy political waiting period. But the court decision is going to be huge. I totally agree with that. Absolutely agree with that.
All right, Larry Kudlow, always enlightening, always helpful. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Good to have you.